Sometimes an event will happen out in the world that seems to have absolutely no connection to your life whatsoever. The event for me was the football game between LSU and Nebraska on January 1st, 1971. To tell you how disconnected I was a 13-year-old girl sitting in my parents' living room in the light of the Christmas tree, and they were watching football. I didn't care about football. I didn't know anything about it. But when the Cornhuskers won, my 11-year-old sister, Chris, turned to our family and said, "I'm going to go to college in Nebraska." I didn't think much of it. I didn't care. I saw myself as going to Princeton or NYU. I was an East Coast girl. There was another little factor going on in our lives, and that was my dad. My dad was somewhat of a bully and domineering to our entire family. He really supported this idea of my sister going to Nebraska, and then he informed me he wanted me to go to the same school too. Nebraska? Where was that? All I could think of was covered wagons and the Platte River, a mile wide and inch deep. I learned that in 4th grade. That was what I knew. And so, as much as I resisted, at the age of 18, I could not resist my dad. I rebelled in other ways. But when it came time for him to write the check for my first semester, I ended up in the car, traveling across the Great Plains, terrified. Dropped off at Lincoln, Nebraska. A town! A town! We finally got to a town. I went to college there, and a year later my sister followed. So my dad got his dream. We were in college together at the University of Nebraska. While I was there, I lived on a co-ed floor, and there was a gentleman there named Jeff. He was the health aide on our floor, so he was the person you went to for aspirin or throat lozenges. Jeff also had hot plate, cereal, food, he kept eggs, he cooked bacon at times like midnight. This was attractive to me at that time. He also had men in his room, lots of men. And so I became friends with him. And over time, I finished my schooling, and it was time for me to go back to New Jersey. And when I did, I went right back into that pressure cooker with my dad. He wanted me to work in his real estate office and be his salesperson. This didn't work out at all. And it became so serious. I was ready to kill myself. I was seriously contemplating suicide. And you know what? There's a spirit in me that has a little bit of wisdom going on. I had the sense to call up Jeff in Omaha. And you know what I said? "I think I'm going to kill myself, Jeff!" He was a little bit, he knew I was a drama queen, so he was very calm. "Really? What's going on?" "I don't want to live with my family anymore." And I kept ranting like that, and at the end of the conversation I said, "Jeff, will you marry me?" He said, "Well, we're friends. I wouldn't want to mess that up." I said, "But I promise, we can get divorced in a few weeks. I'll move to California. You'll never have to see me again." He said, "Well, I like you. I wouldn't want to never see you again." But I begged and I pleaded, and finally, I don't even know how, I talked him into it, but I said, I'm moving to Omaha. And so Jeff, I have to tell you, he was the third boy out of 3. He was the baby. And his 2 older brothers had to get married in high school. And so when he told his parents that he was getting engaged to a Jersey girl, his dad said, "Oh no, am I bringing a shotgun to this wedding too?" It turned out no. And his parents were so happy, they actually had our wedding in their home. We weren't very religious or church-going at the time, so it was the perfect solution for us. Time seemed to slip away a little bit. A couple of months went by. Jeff was working. I was living in his apartment, working part-time. We were in a rhythm. I was starting to forget about moving to California. And I was noticing that he really was a nice guy. And he was neat and tidy, and he cooked, made the bed, he vacuumed. I liked all this. I was madly in love with a man who was running around the Northwest somewhere finding himself. And he did come back to find me. And I really thought, yes, he's the one. I was so passionately crazy about it. But he made the mistake of coming for a visit, and the 3 of us sat around Jeff and my apartment. And I thought, you know, I could always leave Jeff and go with this guy. But the guy was kind of a mess. I had to compare Jeff to him. I had no choice. He smoked, and he would leave his cigarette on the end of the counter where I would perpetually worry that he was going to burn it. He drank, and he burped loudly and disgustingly. I saw myself leaving Jeff and going with this guy and ending up taking care of some drunken, miserable mess the rest of my life. So true love, true love. Again, that wisdom came to me. And I said, I think I'll stay where I am. As things went on, Jeff's family accepted me and loved me like their own. They took me in. And about a year or 2 after we were married, Jeff's dad got cancer, and I became part of the family as he passed away. There was one night I remember where he called us to the hospital. He was kind of hallucinating on some drugs, and he wanted me to take dictation. I got a pad and a pen, and I stood beside his bed and said, "Jack, what do you need?" And he said, "Take a memo to the people back in Omaha." And right in that moment, I knew I was part of this family. I was going to stay with them. And I did. And when Jeff's father passed away, I was part of their family, and I didn't want to leave. But I had this wandering eye for what had I been missing? What had I perhaps settled for? Maybe I didn't have the passion. Maybe there was Mr. Right out there for me. All the time I was thinking like that. When we were married 15 years, I thought maybe I'd been test driving long enough. And I decided I wanted to get married again in a big commitment ceremony. That's what we did. Now, you wouldn't think about Nebraska, but he came from Nebraska. And my connection is still strong because of my sister Chris, the one who got us started. My sister Chris, responsible for me marrying a Nebraskan. Isn't that interesting? And now, my sister and I go back to Nebraska every single year for a football game. I've turned into a Husker. Yay. You can tell. I am so blessed and lucky to have found the state of Nebraska. Their motto at the school, the University of Nebraska, is "There is no place like Nebraska." Perhaps you've heard that. Who would know that there were people like that there, that were so kind, that would take us in? Where I came from in New Jersey, people were not so nice. In Nebraska, when you walk into almost any service establishment, people say, "May I help you?" In New Jersey, it's much more, "What do you want?" It's just a matter of style. Well, I came to like the kinder, gentler people. I gave up that meanness inside of me that was always rushing and hurrying to the next thing all the time, hurry, hurry, hurry. That's how I was. Why would Jeff have ever married somebody like me? I think because he thought he was getting rid of me soon. I was just a temporary, just a hold. After 17 years, we finally had a child. Who knew that we were even capable of that? When I told Jeff that I wanted to have a family, he said, "You, the child hater?" I said, "In aerobics class, I've met other women, and they say that when it's your child, you don't hate them so much." So I decided to give it a whirl. And after we had our first child, I scratched my head and realized we're so old, and our family is so distant on the East Coast. This little girl would have nobody. And so I had a second child, so that my daughter would have somebody when I'm old and gone and Jeff is old and gone. This is what comes from love, when you don't start out with expectations of staying together. If you start out with that divorce in mind, anything can happen. To this day, my sister is a Nebraska fan. I'm a Nebraska fan. And to this day, we both look at the people in the state of Nebraska as something really special, a great difference between where we grew up, and such a blessing, such a precious, precious place. And when I got there, I did say, I don't want to live in Omaha my whole life, all right? I thought maybe California, but we made it as far as Denver back in 1984. And I've been so blessed and lucky to call this place my home. I've been so blessed and lucky to raise my children here. You don't know what event might be taking in the place in the world, even tonight, that could seem so incredibly disconnected from you. But right now, something might be happening that's setting your life onto a trajectory that you never could have imagined. Much like me as a teenage girl, sitting in the blinking light of my parents' Christmas tree after they had been watching football all evening. I still could not understand or have ever predicted that that's where I would end up. Who would know that a little 11-year-old girl would choose in one instant to go with something that she saw as a champion? Who would ever dream that? We all in this room have our times when we're like that too, and that is my story. I've come from that place, and I don't know where I'm going next.